Have you ever listened to a podcast like mine or read a book from an expert and the advice that they gave you, you just didn't relate to at all? Or worse yet, they gave you advice and you followed it to the T and it didn't yield any results. Sometimes really great advice can actually cost you a ton of progress. And that's because not all great advice is great all the time. Let's get into it. So today, it's just me. I want to talk to you about something that comes up a lot for people who are in my role, where I do a fair amount of podcasts or webinars or, guest appearances and stuff like that. And oftentimes there's an MC, a well-meaning MC, who wants to extract helpful things from me for the audience. And they might ask me a question like, hey, for an MSP who's watching this, who wants to grow, what do you think is the first thing they should do? I've been asked that question many times, and I've probably been guilty of asking some of my guests sort of similarly poorly worded questions. But it's just that. It's not a good question, because the right response from somebody who knows what they're doing is not a statement to that, but the right response to that question is another question. Because if somebody said to me, I was at a Q&A and they walk up to the microphone and said, hey, I'm trying to grow my MSP, what should I do next? What I would say is, well, what did you do last? Did it work? Why or why not? How many people do you have? What's your objective? How much money do you want to spend? How much time do you have to dedicate to this? What market are you in? What have you tried historically? There's so much context that I actually need in order to give a good piece of advice that isn't, guru vanilla nonsense. If we want something that's actually prescriptive and actionable, it needs to be contextualized. And that's just a sign of somebody who actually has done the work, and their advice isn't just things that they're, parroting off of some book that they read or a bunch of LinkedIn posts that they've written, which unfortunately a lot of thought leaders are really just thought followers who have a lot of social media followers. So they just say things that other people have said over and over again, and they get a lot of credit for those ideas. But you can always tell those kinds of people who their advice isn't actionable and it doesn't actually apply or translate to your world. That means that advice might not be coming from the right place. Or frankly, it might be coming from the right place, but at the wrong time. So let me break this down here. There's kind of three types of advice that I want to define today. And the goal is that the next time you are sourcing expertise, or you're bringing in a consultant or something, or you're collaborating even in a peer group, you can bucket whatever other people are saying into one of these categories, because it doesn't necessarily mean that people who are giving you advice that doesn't work, it doesn't mean it was bad advice. Maybe it wasn't right for you today. So 3 types of advice being universal advice, contextual advice, and then what I'm calling stage-gated advice or sequential advice. Imagine, let's use an analogy here. Let's say that growing your business, we're talking about, taking a road trip. Okay, your business journey is you're about to get in a car and drive to a destination. Okay, so think about advice that somebody would give you if maybe they had gone before you and done a road trip, or you've never done a road trip, or they sell the car, or they make maps, whatever. They have some reason why they're giving you advice. Some of the things they say are going to apply to you. Some of the things they say are not going to apply to you, and some of it's going to depend on where you are and what happened last. Okay. Starting with universal advice. This is essentially principles, okay? The idea of universal advice is that it applies in almost any situation you can find it to be helpful. Examples. On a journey, you should know where gas stations are. When your gas light comes on, you should find a gas station. That piece of advice is always good. Hey, you should make sure that your companions are reliable. That makes sense. Make sure that your check engine light isn't on before you start the long journey. Or make sure that you've checked the weather to make sure that there's nothing crazy going to be going on. Basic stuff like that. Let's translate that into business examples. There's certain pieces of advice that are just good advice. Know your customer. Track your numbers. Build trust before you ask for a commitment. Don't sell what you can't deliver. This advice, you should never, win a Nobel Prize because you say things like this. Most of these pieces of advice at this point are placations that we've all heard so many times because, there's really nothing new under the sun in terms of general best practices. Sometimes people can have their own nuance to these, but in reality, it's just good reminders that we should say to each other all the time. Hey, look both ways before crossing the street. It's just a good piece of advice, right? Here's the thing. Following universal advice is not going to guarantee you success. However, ignoring or violating universal advice will almost guarantee that you'll fail. If there is a general best practice, a series of general best practices that you choose to completely overlook, completely run in the opposite direction of, in an effort to be contrarian or an effort to save money or whatever your motivation is, you're going to make it significantly harder on yourself than you need to. Fair statement? Okay, so nobody's making the big bucks by telling you, hey, smile and wash your hands and, mind your P's and Q's and keep your elbows off the table. That's basic universal advice, okay? But let's talk about the second type of advice, which is contextual advice. Contextual advice is actually I think probably 80% of the advice that we hear on the internet is actually contextual advice, but it is given as if it was universal. So contextual is environmentally dependent. It's circumstantially, situationally changes. It depends on your situation, your constraints, and your destination. Let me give you some examples. Let's go back to that where let's say I'm at a Q&A and somebody walks up to a microphone and says, hi, I'd like to grow my business. What should I do? And I say, pay-per-click ads, for sure. Pay-per-click is super reliable. You should start doing pay-per-click ads tomorrow. Okay, that piece of advice depends on an assumption of what has already happened. I have to assume that this person has done all the prerequisite work that is required in order for a pay-per-click campaign to be successful. Some of you are going to grip the steering wheel a little tighter right now out of frustration as you're listening, because you might have been a person who heard this kind of contextual advice and you were like, hey, that person's smarter than me and I'm going to be humble and try something. And you threw 10 grand into pay-per-click ads and you got one, dairy farmer on your website and that's all you got out of it. Well, it doesn't mean pay-per-click isn't a good idea. It means it wasn't the right thing for you to do then. Make sense? In this situation, for pay-per-click, you've got to have your organic locked down. You've got to have an organic content strategy completely in place. Your ICPS to be airtight, super, super specific. You have to have your copywriting gorgeous. If you're ripping off other people's copywriting or just spitting out ChatGPT stuff, yeah, your pay-per-click creative is not going to catch any eyeballs, or it's not going to catch the right eyeballs. So you're going to be spending money on impressions that don't convert, or the conversions that do come in are not going to be qualified because you didn't do any of that foundational stuff. Also, setting up pay-per-click campaigns is actually fairly complicated. It's a lot of data you have to manage all the time. You also have to have a certain amount of money that you can spend. You have to have, it's a big drain on your capital. So if working capital is a massive constraint for you, then pay-per-click is not worth it. You shouldn't be throwing it all on a credit card. That would be a terrible idea, right? So this is an example of some of the assumptions that an expert would be making for them to just blindly tell you in all situations, you right now, yes, you listener, should be doing pay-per-click. Do it right now, immediately. That's the best thing you can do to grow your business. And oftentimes we see gurus, which are really just a person who achieved success, who then assumes that they assume responsibility. They say, the success happened because of me, and I get total credit for everything that went right, and therefore everything that I did is what everyone else should do. Look, when I was in my mid-20s or even early 20s, I was super guilty of this. Every time something would work, I would just assume that was a blanket thing everybody should do. When in reality, things work for me because of my specific personality. And if you don't have a personality like mine, you should not sell the way I sell, Or I think you know what I mean, right? Like not everything works for everybody every time. Not every pickup line is going to work for every single person. Okay? Because sometimes Mel Brooks can say a series of words and everybody will die laughing. And if you say the same series of words, nobody's going to laugh. right? Because he's funny, and he's funny in a specific way that makes that joke work. Do you see what I'm getting at? I'm hoping this is clear. So, you're going on a journey and someone says, hey, by the way, always turn right at the barn. Think about how dumb that piece of advice would be. Hey, when you get to a barn, turn right. What? Yeah, when I was headed to Oklahoma, I turned right at the barn, and that's how I found my destination. That's because of where you were going and where you were coming from. Well, if you were going the same place but coming from the opposite direction, then the right piece of advice would be at the barn, turn left. Do you see my point? It is so dependent on what you're doing, where you're coming from, what you're trying to achieve, the context, right? What your limitations are, what your skill set is, what your soft skill set is, what your MSP's brand and position is, what your MSP's focus is, what types of customers you want to get. All of these things need to change. All of these things are going to add nuance and change and variance to the right series of events, the right series of actions for you to take, the right direction for you to, drive to get to your destination. So, hey, take the scenic route, or you should always drive overnight. You should always avoid highways. You should camp instead of booking a hotel. Turn right at the barn. These are dumb examples of contextual advice that is appropriate in some situations. For a business, that might be run paid ads, build your personal brand, hire a salesperson, productize your service, raise your prices, double your prices. Maybe not. So contextual advice, it sounds universal when it's being given by somebody who doesn't understand the context of their own story. It's usually a little bit of ego, maybe naivety, that somebody says, I had success and therefore the things that I do are right for everybody. There's a very popular thought leader right now. I'm not going to say their name not because they can't take it, but because I don't want to get hate mail from you guys. There's a very, very, very popular business thought leader who is taking the world by storm. I guarantee you've heard of them. And this person had struggled for a long time and has put in a ton of work, one of the hardest working, allegedly hardest working from the stories you see on the internet. But they had like 1,000x, 6,000x growth in 1 year, and now they're one of the richest people. I think he's younger than me, actually. And he writes a bunch of books, and people read it like they're reading the Bible. They quote it like they're quoting Moses. That guy had a cosmic alignment in his story. I'm not trying to take away from his success, but you might know who I'm talking about, but you might not. It doesn't matter, okay? This person I figured out this one thing, and then I went from $500,000 a year to $6 million a year in 4 months, and now now my jet parks on Pluto, and all my wives are hot, and whatever the hell. I sleep 90 minutes a day, and the rest of the time I spend winning. But all of this advice that we get is treated as universal advice because we have a very high level of respect for that thought leader, which is A-okay. I have a lot of respect for that thought leader, and a lot of their advice I take, actually. But I think many of the things that come out of thought leaders like this mouths, out of their books and out of their podcasts, they're all stated as blanket universal truths, when in reality there's so many assumptions, there's so many circumstances that led to their success in that situation that they are forgetting are not universal circumstances. Is that fair to say? Are you guys with me? What's my point? You should not do every single thing that I say worked for me. And I probably, you should never say never. So I probably have been guilty of this in some of my past, definitely in my earlier stuff when I was younger, before I started Feel Good MSP. But what I'm trying to do when I'm asking questions to my guests on my podcast is not say, what does an MSP do? But hey, if an MSP is trying to achieve what you're describing, what advice would you give them? I'm always trying to get contextual advice that you don't have to follow every single piece, and you don't have to prioritize every single thing, It all depends on the destination and where you are on your journey in relationship from your starting point to that destination, and how fast you want to get there and what you're willing to pay to get there faster, All of these things are very important context when you're taking advice. Okay, I think you get it on the contextual advice. Let's talk about the third piece of advice. This is what I'm calling stage-gated advice. Also, I think sequential advice was my first name for it. I couldn't tell which one was a clearer way. So this is me being lazy and letting you choose. Sequential advice or a stage-gated advice, meaning the stage that you're at is going to determine whether or not this advice is good for you. This advice is in many ways binary, depending on what happened to you last. Advice that only works when certain prereqs exist. So you can't, if somebody says, hey, you should optimize, make sure you optimize your fuel efficiency. Well, that doesn't happen if you don't have a car. You can't take a detour if you haven't started your trip. Or you can't take a scenic route if you're 7 days behind, right? You can't speed up if you don't know where you're going. So sometimes people say you should always take the scenic route, you should always optimize for fuel efficiency, and you should always drive faster. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you're in a school zone and you don't even know which way you're going. Maybe you should slow down and pull over, figure out what the hell you're doing with your life before you double down on the direction you're going, right? You've got to know certain things must be in place in order for certain pieces of advice. Business examples here, let me make this clearer. People obsess over conversion rates in marketing. Obsessing over, hey, you got to get your conversion rates, try to get this conversion rate percentage or try to get this click-through rate, and they want to optimize that, but you don't even have any traffic. You can't optimize 14 web visitors and 6 of them were your mom. And 2 of them were your developer, the other 8 of them were your developer testing the website, okay? You have nothing to optimize. So that's not a good piece of advice. Your next piece of advice should be get people to care that your business exists. Make that your priority, then going into the optimizing. Hey, you should scale, but you don't know how to retain any clients. That's a big problem I've run into. I'm great at getting clients. Retaining them, for me personally, is much harder. That's not my area of expertise. Automating, this is a massive one, you guys. The amount of you people, I shouldn't say that way. The amount of folks that are spending so much of their time automating processes that haven't even been standardized, or they haven't even really been tested. You write an SOP that ChatGPT writes for you, and then you go into N8N and start automating it. You're like, I don't even know if this is a good process. There might be a better way to do this. I might be missing something massive. I have no historical records to know that this thing is worth doing over and over again 1,000 times faster. So you shouldn't be automating yet, right? Hiring somebody before you've proven the motion. This one is so massive. People do the right things in the wrong order very often, specifically around sales. And what I mean by that, there's 2 big examples I'm going to give you. The first one is people say, well, I'm busy. Also, I hate selling and I got to grow my MSP. So I'm going to hire a sales rep and then they're going to make sales for me. So you hire a sales rep and then they go, hey, this sounds exciting. I'm happy to be on. And you go, yeah, you're the first rep. You know, growth opportunity. People who hire after you are all going to report to you. You report directly to the owner. And they go, great. So what's our playbook? And you go, that's your job. I don't know. Well, what CRM are we using? You tell me. Or use a spreadsheet until you close 10,000 MRR, then I'll buy you a CRM. Okay, who am I calling? I just start with some businesses in the area. How do I find them? Google them. You have this person that you hire who's completely under-resourced, no training, no tools, no proven success because you've only known how to sell referrals as an owner, which is the easiest type of sale you can make. So you don't know how to guarantee that they're going to be successful. You don't have any clue if they're going to be successful. You are literally guessing. You're kissing frogs, hoping one of them turns into a prince. So you hire them, you fire them in usually it's 90 days on the short side, 9 months to 12 months on the long side, and you've done that more than once. I got news for you. You are not at that stage for that where that is the right piece of advice for you. All right? Hiring a sales rep is like step 6 and you're on step 2. It doesn't mean you shouldn't hire one. It means you should go backwards. Look at the reason that person wasn't successful and then follow the advice that will close those loops. You with me? I don't mean to be heavy. I don't mean for this to sound like bad news. So that shouldn't be the case. Okay? This should be good news for you, because hopefully it might be explaining to you why the thing that's super logical that you're doing isn't working, and it's just because you're out of order, which is a much easier problem to solve than you're doing everything right and still not getting results. You're doing everything right in the wrong order, which is why you're not getting results. Here's the other big one. Okay? People want to maximize lead gen before they really know how to sell. I just had a conversation, and I'm gonna have this person on my podcast. They work for a lead gen agency for MSP. She was like, I was on the phone with her. She's like, I'm looking at an account right now. We've gotten them. It was over 150 accounts in 3 years. It was more than 150 leads. It was more than a lead a week for 3 straight years. I think it was like 170 or something. 170 set and held appointments over 3 years. 0 signed customers. 170 leads. 0 closes. You might be saying, wow, that's not my problem. Trust me. Listen, that guy didn't think it was his problem either. That guy was positive that the problem was his lead gen agency. He's positive of it. So he just says, I need more leads. I need better leads. No, dude. 170? You could literally put 170 people in a row on the phone with Alexa, and Alexa's going to close one of them. Okay? There's 0 excuse for that. What's the point? There's so much stuff that needed to be put in place for his sales process to be better. He didn't have a script. His pricing is all over the place. His packaging is super vague and confusing. His brand is terrible. Nobody likes him or trusts him because of the way he positions himself. He positions his brand or his product. He doesn't appear competitive. He has no social proof. So even if he finally spends thousands of dollars to get somebody in a meeting with him, he can never close the deal. Why? Because what's my point? He is not ready for leads. Not even close. Think about the fact that the average cost per meeting is $1,500 to $2,500. So he probably spent $200,000 on these meetings. What does he have to show for it? Nothing. Is it because lead gen doesn't work? No, of course lead gen works. It clearly works. Its whole job is to get you leads. He's getting more leads than you're probably getting, right? A lead a week is a great volume. He's not closing any of them. This is the most common thing I hear. People come to me and say, no, my sales process is great. I just don't have any leads. I don't think that that's probably the case for you. If you actually had a good sales process, and by that I mean if you had done your ICP work, if your brand was well positioned, if your copywriting was compelling, then you could do some low lift outreach, and your outbound would be generating opportunities for you. You'd be closing some business. But if you're closing 2 to 5 opportunities a year, I don't think lead gen is your next problem. I think your overall sales maturity is the next problem that you need to solve. This is an example right now. I'm giving you stage-gated advice. And I'm giving you contextual advice as well, I should say. There are things that must exist in order for lead generation to be a good investment for you. I'm not anti-lead gen. I'm not anti-marketing. I'm just telling you, I've done this so many hundreds of times now with MSPs. I know why marketing works, and I can tell when marketing is not going to work for somebody. I can always tell. And they never want to listen to me. They always want to skip the stage, and they want to skip the hard stage of developing themselves as a person and developing their back end and their bottom of their funnel. They want to develop the top of their funnel, and then they waste all of that effort. So stage-gated advice is really critical when you get it at the right time. It's super helpful, but it becomes harmful when people preach it like it's a shortcut. This is really common. People are like, yeah, you want to get more closes? Of course, hey, there's a direct line. You just got to get more at-bats. That's how lead gen people sell lead gen. They tell you, yeah, it's a numbers game. All you got to do is get more opportunities. That's only true if you're not leaking and losing opportunities because you don't know what you're doing. If you're ready for the opportunities and you know what type of opportunities you want and you can articulate that, and that lead gen agency can get you that type of opportunity, then it's a numbers game. But they leave all that out. They skip all those steps and they just tell you that you can go straight to the end. And I should be sensitive here. I want to make it clear. It's not lost on me that in the case of that client that this person I met with was talking about, I'm like, I told her like, hey, you should fire this guy. Because this is not a funny story. This is incredibly tragic. This guy's out $200,000. Are you kidding me? That's an insane amount of money. Most people will never have that much money in their bank account, okay? He's out that much money because he was trying to skip the steps. He was trying to skip steps, and it cost him dearly. If he had just done the other things in the other orders, you should be able to close 25% of your opportunities. If he got 6 months or 8 months and 8 months and 4 opportunities a month, even if his closing rate was half of what it should have been, he could have got 4 clients instead of 0 if he waited a year first and got himself all set up. So what do I want you to take away from this? What I want you to take away from this is that if you've taken a piece of advice that burned you, look, usually what I'm saying on my podcast is, hey, almost everything is always your fault. Look in the mirror, blame yourself. And that's kind of my universal advice that maybe should be contextualized, because there's a really good chance that you listen to a guru who collapsed their entire journey into a headline. And they made that headline universal. Platforms and partners, they reward certainty. They don't reward platforms like LinkedIn and stuff. They reward overpromising, bold statements, certainty. They don't ever reward context. Like nuanced posts don't go viral. Polarizing posts go viral. Things that say, phone calling is dead. I mail people a horseshoe in the mail and then they get curious and I closed $5 billion this year doing that. Stupid BS like that is what goes viral, which is unfortunately why bad advice or types 2 or 3 of advice keep getting categorized as type 1 advice over and over again. Another big one is that a lot of people who have success, their success erases the memory of the constraints that they had earlier on in their business. So now that they can spend 30 grand a month on marketing, they're going to give you advice as if you can do the same thing today and it's your fault that you can't, when in reality, it took them 10 years to build to that. The final thing, I think, problem with advice is that gurus, which is my condescending word for an internet expert feels a puffed up sense of expertise by making assumptions. Oftentimes when people are subject matter experts or pseudo subject matter experts, they think, hey, I'm going to read you your rights. I'm going to read you your own mail because I've been there. And so I know what's happening to you. And so I'm going to make all these assumptions. And then because I can I'm the business owner whisperer, you're going to listen to me and know that I'm a genius because I can make all these assumptions about you. So unfortunately, assumptions are often rewarded in that line of thinking. And so people who write books make all these assumptions. People who do podcasts make all these assumptions, and it's destructive. So most advice that you're getting, it's not even necessarily bad advice. It's just missing a label, a warning label, and the context on either side of it that it should come with. And if all advice came with that, you'd be a lot better off. So here is my prompt to you, the listener. Here's my filter that I recommend you put between you and everything that I say or someone like me says to you. Number 1, before you take advice, ask yourself, is this a universal? Is there context, or is this a stage-gated piece of advice? Another way of asking that is, what must already be true in order for that advice to work? What must already be true in order for that advice to work? And what could I break if I apply this advice too early? That's an interesting question. And then finally, is there anything that between where I am today and that piece of advice that I need to execute first? So just reverse engineer the finished product of the advice. People say you should be doing pay-per-click ads. Then you go, okay, if pay-per-click ads are good, then my goal is not to turn on pay-per-click ads, but to work towards turning on pay-per-click ads. And I know now I'm going to look up, what do I need to do to make pay-per-click ads successful? Look at that list of tasks, turn that into a project for you, and that's your 2026 plans. Hey, that's what I'm going to work on right now because it's working onto doing this other thing, getting to the pay-per-click. Or I really want to hire a cold caller. I really want to hire an account executive so I don't have to do this, or an account manager so I don't have to manage them. Okay, well, what needs to be in place for an account manager to be successful? That's the question you need to ask yourself, right? What causes an account manager to fail? Get the context first. Create an ecosystem, create an incubator where that role is going to be successful before you hire that person. And you're so much better off. Now you're actually following that advice in the way it was intended to be followed. What's my point? My takeaway here for you is that, listen, keep doing it. Keep going. I believe in you, probably more than you believe in you. I genuinely, deeply hope that you find as much possible help out of this podcast as you can. And just keep in mind that not everything we say is going to apply to you in the same order. Not everything we say is going to apply to you, period. Okay? And I hope that what I'm doing with my podcast is giving you the permission to ask these questions, to reject anything that you just simply don't agree with or that doesn't sit right with you, or to contextualize the things that we're saying and make sure that you can do so in a way in the right order without compromising and excusing away all of your limitations, like without doing it in a way that's just rationalizing away what makes it hard. But yeah, I hope this works for you. Hope this episode helped. Listen, keep doing what you're doing. You're going to crush it this year, my friend. Thanks for listening. I'll see you at the next one.